So this exciting time to launch our roadmap. And it has been 1 year, 1 year in the making, because I remember probably same time last year, we got together, we basically formed a team in DBI to basically give a task for us to develop this roadmap. And after 1 year, this is what we have come up with. But as Bezos said, I think of course it's just the beginning, because we are going to continue to fine-tune, update, and also to collaborate with many other stakeholders to really to improve this. And I had a chat with Alice, and we don't want to duplicate things. We want to learn excellent work done by Aspect, we Council, ABCD. I think there are many other people have done excellent work. But what is our roadmap is about? We really want to have it as a decision-making tool, because as just going back to, we actually need a decision-making tool. Really enjoy Jason talk about as a developer, what are the things you really have to face with. So if there's a kind of tool or something for you to consider when you go about certain development, I think a roadmap like this at the high level show what are the things need to be done at the national level, but let's say at the individual company level. Also, it actually can be informed about, of course, we are going to invest in certain technology or maybe low carbon technology. What are the benefits and costs and the risks? So going back to your point, which I totally agree, that decarbonization is the opportunity rather than obligation. And green doesn't mean expensive, and it actually can be faster and cheaper. That's what we want to get into. As I said, the roadmap here is really about decision-making tool, which we start from measuring the national numbers, and then we compare that with other countries. So we took a lot of time to really gather information from different countries. What are the roadmap in, let's say, Europe, America, and today we heard about the Argentina, which of course we hope to get more information from you to see how we can say ideas. So we actually also want to start with measuring, and that's your point, Paulo. I really agree with that. So start with measuring and start looking at the what-if scenario. If we are going to do this, what's going to be the impact, let's say by 2035 or 2040. So really, that's the aim of the roadmap. We also spend quite a bit of time to look at the methodology. There's many ways to collect information to really come up with the carbon accounting. But what are the things we can do now which are more robust and good trust for the long run? So starting with the measurement, because I think we really want to start where we are, where we were before, because if we look at the journey to net zero for us as a country, so back in 2005, and I think that's the benchmark, the point, we got by, it was about 613 million tons per year emission we got. But I think we have done quite well over the last 20 years. So the figures that last year, I think 2024, I think is about here. I think you can see the figures 2023 there is about 440 million tons. So we actually we reduced about 28% from the 2005 baseline. And if we can look at the total reduction, which is about 170 million tons reduction. And if you look at that per year, so the historical reduction rate is about 9.4 million tons per year. So I think you can see the graph from the right-hand side there is pretty linear for the last 20 years. And the rate of reduction is about 9.4, close to 10 million tons per year reduction. But the problem is really the next 5 years. By 2030, as a country, we have committed to 43% reduction. And of course, even we recently got our government has gone to look at the 2035 target, which is about 62 to 70% reduction. So we want to look at those targets to see how realistic can it align with some other climate goal and how actually can affect our industry. So that's the high level picture. So let's look at, for example, the more detailed. So we look at the future acceleration required. Because if we keep doing the same rate of reduction, about 9.4 million tons per year, we are not going to meet the target. Because if you look at the 2030 target, so of course you can see the target emission by 2030 would be 350 million tons in total emission. So the rate of reduction is about 15 million tons per year. So it's actually a lot more than we did over the last 2 decades. Even looking at the 2035 target, which is quite impressive, looking at 62 to 70% reduction, we actually have to even accelerate that reduction rate to about 23 to 33 million tons per year. So I think we can see we have to really accelerate that reduction. And of course, with that, if we look at 2050 net zero goal, I think we can see the next 25 years. It's going to be interesting because you can see, for example, here, you can see that. So the required rate is quite a lot more than we did in the past. So what we see here is the industry need to look at different mindset. It's actually about, if you look at the rate of reduction, is about 2.5 to offset to reduce the emission. So also we want to look at the climate goals in terms of the temperature 1.5 degree pathway or 1.9 and 2.5 pathway. So if you look at the current scenario, if you keep doing the things we are doing, I think the net zero is going to be delayed. If you look at 1.5 degree pathway, it's going to be 13 years delay. And the 1.9 degree pathway even will be longer. It's a 21 year delay. I'm not talking about the 2.5, which is already too long. So the second thing is about the 2030 the gap. So our target is 350 million tons. So it's 43% reduction. And the 1.5 degree requirement is about 350 million tons. So if we have a gap, which is about 35 million tons, which is the 10% additional effort will be required. So that's why critical, because it's actually 2030 is coming up very soon. And of course, we have to fill that gap, which is quite significant, 35 million tons, which is probably about a third of the total environment emission. So the total environment emission at the moment is about 100 million tons per year. So we come to that a bit later. But that just to show we have a big gap to fill in. So we look at also the 2035 target or strengthened alignment. And of course, in this case, this is going to be the new target by 2035, which is about 180 to 230 million tons. So reduction. And of course, this is quite challenging. And if you look at the 1.5 degree requirement, this is about 230 million ton reduction. So I think this is pretty much aligned with the 1.5 degree pathway. So if you basically look at that as the more realistic pathway, how government 2035 target is aligned by that. But there's still a gap there. So we can look at the 2030 gap to 1.5 degrees is about 35 million tons. So the 2035 gap, so I think there's still a gap there. And if you look at the 2050 emission challenge, so if we really can't do it without the carbon sink. So we really need to look at the carbon capture sequestration, CCUS as one example. So that would basically, the current carbon sink at the moment is about 88 million tons. So we need to really look at the negative 54 million tons by 2040, and even going further with the 126 million tons by 2050. So we cannot get there just by using the the low carbon technology, we need to look at the carbon sink, carbon capture as required to get into 2050 net zero. So again, this is really, I can see the opportunity in our building industry. We look at low carbon concrete as one example. The question here is, let's say we're going to adopt low carbon concrete for all major projects that now come into buildings. So what would be the reduction we can get by 2050, 2030, 35, and 50? So we did some scenario on that, and this wouldn't be in our detailed report because we quantify the amount of concrete used in the current industry. We look at the opportunity to reduce, and we look at the cost involved to do that. So those things about that we wouldn't even discuss further. And I just want to highlight the great work done by Mikla. I think, of course, with the low carbon concrete handbook and QR the material, I think really provide a lot of information for the industry to understand the cost and benefit and also the risks involved. So we're going to include that in the detailed roadmap as a tool to look at how industry will adopt different technology and how it's going to contribute to this reduction. So let's look at the spectral performance. We know in terms of the operational energy, we have done really well because our grid has been electrified with a lot of renewable energy source. So you can look at the number here. For example, the operational energy from our grid actually has reduced here. So if we keep doing this, you need about, I think, 80% reduction. So by 2030, I think with the current target, I think a lot of the buildings will be net zero operational. And the question is, can we do that? At what cost? Also, another good area is the land use charge and forestry. So I think we have done well in reducing the emission from the forestry side. But if you look at the building sector, I think that figure on the right-hand side is really about scope 1 in our building sector. I think it's actually increased. We also look at the transport, which also, even we got more electric vehicle on the road, but again, I think the rate is not enough. So I think we can see the increase in transport sector as well. So there are a lot of more work need to be done on those sectors. It doesn't mean even on the left-hand side, the operational energy, the rate of adopting for the rolling out solar farm and wind farm is actually not as quickly as people expected. So we still have to do a lot of work on that side as well. So looking at the next 5 years, I think the next 5 years will be critical. If you look at the budget, current budget we have, the 1.5 degree budget will be exhausted by 2028, only 3 years from now. And if we look at, of course, if you look at the 1.7 degree budget, will be exhausted by 2030. So I think we have to do a lot in the next few years. And the reduction rate, as I mentioned before, for the 1.5 degree pathway, so it's about 20 million ton reduction per year. Again, how it's going to affect our industry? We need to really go down further into different elements of the sector, and from the embodied carbon to the operational energy requirement. So the gap to close, as I said, I think it's about 35 million tons, which is about 10% additional effort we will need to do over the next few years. So there's a 6 critical action required. Not all those will be done. It, of course, have to be done, but there's also other policy updated recently. Just want to highlight the renewable energy, the acceleration of that, the coal, the phasing out coal is also very challenging. There's some delay and also there's some extension we have seen in the last couple of months. The electricity transport, electrify the transport network is also showing some improvement, but it is quite slow. The built environment is, again, is probably the one you want to focus on. We have to electrify building and housing. We also need to look at how we can reduce the embodied carbon, which of course we talk about that in Alison's presentation. The expanding the carbon sink, the carbon capture will play a significant role in the near future, and of course the carbon pricing, how we actually come up with a smart way to get people to see that as an incentive rather than an obligation. So if every year we delay the target, it will be accumulated in future year. So the sooner we do it, and that would save a lot of work down the track. Because you can imagine if we accelerate the reduction, not quickly enough, the future year, let's say 2035 to 2050, we have to drastically cut, which is not possible. So we have to do a lot of work even in the next few years. So let's move on to look at the 4 pillars. We look at accelerated clean energy deployment. We look at the industrial deep transformation, the now natural carbon sink. But I just want to highlight the building transformation. Because we have a housing stock of about 10 million homes, how we actually come up with a plan or roadmap to look at the retrofitting of those homes to reach 6 to 7 stars. What would be the cost? What would be the benefit in terms of the energy consumption? If we look at the embodied carbon, I mentioned about the low carbon example. If we adopt certain procurement policy to encourage first and then mandatory, what would be the outcomes of that? So we're going to build in the what if scenario in our online portal to allow people to look at the what if scenario. If we do this, what is going to be the impact? How it's going to contribute to the reduction target? But of course, the cost to the economy, cost to industry, commercial, and government. So hopefully with the data we are collecting, and just want to highlight, have a AI, I think we can actually come up with a better way to quantify those benefits and risks, as well, and costs. So the building sector, as I mentioned, we are facing a crisis because compared to other sectors, it's probably the worst performing. So we actually want to look at, let's say, the current emission for the Scope 1 figure, so 22 million tons. And of course, it actually increased, and it's about 21% of the total national emission. If we look at the Scope 1, when we look at the old Scope 2 and 3, the scale of the challenge would be a lot more. So at the moment, as I mentioned, it's almost about 95 to 100 million tons, so Scope 1 and 2. And then we look at the breakdown of that in different sectors from residential to commercial. So hopefully we will get more detail into even further information about, let's say, residential. We can break down into single detached, dwelling to attached, and multi-res. So hopefully we can collect more information and share with you. What does it mean if we do this for certain typology of the housing market? But on the construction of the infrastructure, there's also a significant amount of activities, and we want to also quantify that. And I also want to acknowledge the work done by Infrastructure Australia. I think a lot of the information given in their roadmap also will be useful for us to incorporate in here. So going more into their Scope 1 versus Scope 2 emission breakdown here. You can see the figure for Scope 1 and 2, direct and indirect, for the building brown. So the total is about 95 million tons, and you can see here Scope 1 is about 22 versus Scope 2 is about 73 million tons. So with that, we can also look at the building types, residential versus commercial. Why this is important? Because as Jason said in his presentation, that the developer take out the work done by the subcontractor, but how you can get the reliable data from those contractors and hitting the whole carbon emission for your project. So we should be able to come up with some tool to help you to do that. at the project level, which we got one of the demonstration project called Easy Carbon to map out the carbon activities throughout the life cycle project. So we actually can quantify that at the very detailed level as well. We also need a dual strategy here because achieving the 79% total reduction by 2050, we need to do it at different levels from the grid decarbonization, also to look at the building electrification. I think all of that we look at the assumption, the target, and also the outcomes we can get. So that's really the methodology we did when we go down into the level, the most efficient method and how we can make them. Very important to look at the operational versus embodied carbon, which I think, as Alison mentioned, government is really starting to have that as part of the policy. Hopefully will be more mandatory in the near future. But in the meantime, what does it look like? Because we look at the 2020, we have the operational carbon about 84% versus 60% of embodied carbon. But over the next 25 years, I think you can see it totally reverse. The operational energy will be down to 50%, and the majority of the emission would come from embodied carbon. And we probably see the midpoint, 50%, 50-50 split between operational carbon and recovery, maybe about 2028, 29. Or maybe 2030. So basically that's the tipping point where embodied carbon will overtake operational carbon. Of course, we have to run different scenarios to see which one and possibly will be the case. But the critical part is here, because of the change from operational carbon, the shifting to embodied carbon, it's going to create some interesting scenarios for companies or government. I think the procurement low carbon technology will be a lot more significant and impactful for the industry. The carbon pricing, how it's going to play in that, I think also will be interesting. So the whole carbon quantification is essential. You have to look at the whole life cycle because those scenarios will change every year. You can see the electrification of the network. When we see the operational energy coming down, I think that needs to be reflected in for those whole life cycle carbon quantification. And of course, the last point is about material. It will be a key role. The material we use will play a crucial role in the carbon quantification. And for the developers, government or private sectors, I think the selection of the material and the system will be something that need to be quantified properly. So that's going to be some of the other initiatives we are going to do as part of BBI activities. We're going to develop those detailed breakdown and life cycle costing at the different project level. So let's look at the carbon sink, the carbon sequestration. As I mentioned, to be able to get to net zero, that we need to consider that from now, because the technology, some of the technology are there, but the cost is being very expensive. So what you have to look at now is really the roadmap, what we need to get by when. So we look at 2040 target. So we need about 54 million tons per year for the whole Australia. And then by 2050 would be 126 million tons. So that will require a lot of carbon capture, and that we need to look at other things like the forestry. But I think the negative emission technology really play a key role. Of course, in concrete, for example, we've been doing a lot of work in this space, trying to look at how concrete can be a carbon sink. And there's some new research in this space. And timber, of course, will play a key role here. The question is how it can be all in the whole equation. So we are going to quantify that later. So we will look at the roadmap to 2050. We need to get to 2030, 35, 40 with the right reduction strategy first, and the rate will be steeper going down the road from here. So again, it will have a lot of implication about the cost to the industry, the investment we have to put in, because the critical phase, as I mentioned, would be the next 5 years. We really need to speed up the reduction. As I mentioned, we have a big gap, about 35 million tons in total to meet that target. And we have to basically double the rate of reduction. Because here you look at 1.6 pounds faster than historical rate. And after that, between 2030 to 2035, we again need to also increase that rate to about 2.5 times reduction rate. And the next one, of course, 2035, we look at some of the critical transformation required from the energy side, energy sector. Even the building retrofit will be part of that, because if you want to retrofit, about 80% of the total housing stock will be a lot of course, the technology might be here, but the cost involved and the social license to do that is also important to consider. Transport, important, but of course it's our scope for our study. We look at the carbon capture, we look at the green hydrogen development, which will be delayed with the current climate. So the third one, between 2035 to 2040, we look at the target reduction. The gap to close is about 20 to 50 million tons. And again, the rate of reduction will be seen quite significant. So that's those phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's in our roadmap here. And we're actually going to go deeper into the technology required and also the coping will deploy those. We also want to learn from other countries, as I mentioned, that the international context is quite important. Where we are in Australia with 2035 target, we have 62 to 70% reduction target. We look at the European Union, so probably similar range, a bit more aggressive, 66 to 72.5%. United Kingdom, UK is actually a lot more, 80%. And of course, we can see other countries. So we are going to really review and collect more information about the roadmap in other countries to see what they think they will focus on in the context of the built environment, but of course, how different in the climate, all the technology in different countries would be for us to also learn from and reflect in our roadmap. So the per capita emission particularly also important to see. We are currently about 16 tons per person, okay, per year. And of course, we have to really reduce down to about 12 tons per person per year. So if we can see how it's going to affect even each of us. And of course, I'm going to the conclusion. The path forward for us yearly to collect a lot more information. We update the roadmap as we go. We are thinking to do that every 6 months to get further information and update our roadmap. Also to work with many stakeholders to see how this roadmap align to complement other roadmaps. Again, we don't want to duplicate things. We want to also share knowledge and make it a very transparent and open database for everyone can provide comment and of course to update that if we have more information. So the main message here, I think, as I mentioned, the next 5 years is critical. So we have to not looking at the different mindset, because the incremental changes is already past. Because if we don't do that now, it's going to affect us a lot more in the near future. I'm talking about not too long ago, after 2030. So the next 5 years is really make or break for us, right? Heavy industry. So with that, again, I really want to thank many people in the team, because this is a great teamwork. We got, as I mentioned last year, when we formed the team, got basically about 6-7 people. I think most of them are here. Abdullah, Stephen, Mahangi. So a lot of work from internal team, but also we got a lot of information from many other stakeholders. Because I want to acknowledge Jason, others from the industry side, Mekla, so many great information we have even with Monica, Alexis. So I think we share a lot of information because always a lot to learn from Alison and great work. I remember we were involved in the discussion when you got the roadmap, your document report in March. It almost probably going back 1 year earlier that when you started the initiative. And again, with the support from our university, more, I think, as I mentioned early on, I think the university support is so crucial for us. That really come to the point that we hopefully this is a starting point to roll out this roadmap as open access and transparent information for everyone to come together and collaborate. So thank you very much.